Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Sean, and I'm an alcoholic. And that's the end of the facts. All of the rest of this stuff is my experience and my opinion, and I'm not a spokesman for Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not an expert on alcoholism, but I've got some experience and I've gathered some opinions. I'm afraid I want to thank the committee for asking me to be here. It's an extraordinary honor, and this place has a very special place in my heart because the very first conference that I ever spoke at was here in 1983, here in the Riviera. And this has been an incredible weekend. I mean, the speakers have been extraordinary. I mean, can you believe, aren't they incredible? Just, so I've been sitting here, I'm trying really hard to make my ego the fuel rather than the engine of my existence, you know? And you know, your instinct after you've heard all these fantastic speakers is to think, I wonder how I can top this. And I'm not well yet. I mean, if you're looking for a well one, there's another meeting somewhere. I mean, yeah. And I was reminded of what my sponsor told me when I came here the first time. I said, you know, I've been invited to this big Roundup in Las Vegas, and you know, and he said, it's not speaking, it's sharing. So there's no performance involved, and you're only there to share with one person. Most of the time, you never know who it is. Occasionally, you find out. So that's put it in perspective for me. And I have come to understand that standing here at the podium at this workshop is the least important 12-step work there is. It's going to be very easy for me to dazzle you and to tell you anything that I feel I want to about myself and then jump on a plane and get out of here. You never get to see me in my car or at my workplace or in my bedroom or any of those places where I actually live and where I am astonished at how quickly I can become a jerk. I mean, it's almost instantaneous. It's just, woo, you know. The most important 12-step work, of course, is the stuff that you and I do when we get the privilege of doing it, you know, carrying the message to some guy who's throwing up on our shoes, and we're trying to get him sober and take him to their first meeting. I'm one drunk talking to another. That's what this thing is about. And thank God for that, because that's what saved my life. I always consider doing this as a report to my teachers, because you are the only people who have ever been able to teach me anything. I have a learning disability. I can't hear things right. And you know, in my drinking, as it got worse and worse and worse, I went to a lot of moral superiors for help. I went to doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists and priests and nuns and monsignors and gurus and lawyers and judges and policemen. And I explained to them my problem, and some of them were very learned and very compassionate and wanted to help us and had pieces of paper on their walls to prove it, and what they said is, this is what you should do about your problem. Well, anybody points a finger at me and tells me what to do, I bite it off at the knuckle. The extraordinary thing that happened to me was that I came here. And when I got enough courage up to tell you what was actually going on with me, the truth of my life, you said the phrase that saved my life, and you continue to say it in these rooms and in rooms all over the world. And it is it's the miracle phrase. You said, I know how you feel. No one had said that to me before I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. I know how you feel. And as soon as someone says that to me, it dampens down the anxiety enough for me to listen. And then you don't say, this is what you should do about your problems. You say, this is what I did about my problems. Take what you can use. And because of that, I've been able to make a 180-degree turn as a human being in a lot of the areas of my life. I want you to understand that I am a work in progress. There are no plateaus or destinations in Alcoholics Anonymous, at least not in the first 34 years. I've always kind of hoped that I would reach a point where I have gone to enough meetings, sponsored enough guys, done enough service, made enough coffee, that I could kind of pull out a lawn chair and relax, you know? And when I do that kind of thing, or think I can do that kind of thing, I get really nuts. I want you to know how well I'm doing. I was about 20 years sober, and I have been very active in this fellowship my entire sobriety. I was speaking at conferences like this. I was sponsoring a lot of guys. You know, I had been alternate GSR for Southern California. I mean, I was, you know, Mr. AA. I didn't so much walk into rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I kind of glided on about 4 feet of air, you know, just... And I mean, a stunning example. I mean, at times I am a stunning example of sobriety. I mean, I just kind of shimmer with it. I do have an aura at times. You know, you could introduce me to your mother, you know. Other days I don't drink. And then there are those days when I'd like to check into a nice little institution and, you know, get some paper slippers and rubber rooms and make a wallet. Just a little rest. But I've been out here stark staring sober for a long time, and occasionally I am, well, let me tell you how alcoholic I am. I'm 20 years sober, I'm Mr. AA. And I got this job, and we rehearsed this thing at 7 o'clock at night, so I come home from my regular job, eat dinner, and then go to this thing. And I want to get there about 6:45, so I leave the house at 6:30, and between me and the place where I rehearse is a Baskin & Robbins. So the first night on my way to rehearsal, I was a little tired from work, and I decided I'll have a little treat after dinner. So I stopped into Baskin & Robbins, and they had, listen to this, they had chocolate cherry vanilla ice cream, chunks of chocolate and cherries, vanilla. So, you know, I'm sober, and I understand about moderation and balance in my life. So I ordered 1 scoop on a little cone. Ate it in the car as I got to rehearsal. Second night, 1 scoop. Third night, 1 scoop. Fourth night, 2 scoops. Fifth night, I find out that the skinny little redheaded kid who works there on that shift's name is Jimmy. Next night, 2 scoops on a bigger cone. By this time, I'm knowing that Jimmy is working there because he's going to college. Get to know your dealer. So 5 or 6 nights into it, Jimmy has got the waffle cone with the 2 huge scoops waiting for me as I drive up. So we're getting along fine. Jimmy's crazy about me. He's calling me Mr. Allen. Oh, please, Sean, Jimmy. Sean. So Sean and Jimmy are tight. I drive up one night. Jimmy's there, no cone. Now, I say, Jimmy, what's up? What's up? He said, oh, that was a flavor of the month. We don't have it anymore. You don't have it anymore. When did you know about this, Jimmy? Everybody knows about it, Sean. I mean, it's the end of the month. Well, for Christ's sake, when did you tell me? I got about a gallon of it and put it in my freezer. I got about a freezer and bought 60 gallons of it and put it in. Why didn't you say something? By this time, Jimmy's eyes are getting like saucers, you know. He's saying, well, how about something else? We have coconut. I don't want coconut! What kind of crappy ice cream place is this? You'll never hear from me again. I'm out of here! 20 years sober, Mr. AA. So I get in the car, I'm sitting in the car in the parking lot, and I'm looking in the thing, and Jimmy's still standing there like. So I get out of the car, and I could see him physically start to back up as I'm coming back in. And I said, Jimmy, I have to make amends to you. I got a little hooked on your cherry chocolate vanilla, and this came as a surprise to me, and I'm not good with surprises, and I really want you to know that I will never do that kind of thing again. I'm sorry about the scene. And he said, well, that's all right. He said, I hope to see you again soon. I said, not for a year. Now, if you laughed at that story, you belong here. If you're horrified by that story, you should probably pick up an Al-Anon marathon meeting. What I want you to know is that alcoholism doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. We keep it at bay with some kind of spiritual principle practicing in our lives. And if you're new, I got some real bad news for you. There's no spiritual side to this program. The whole thing is spiritual. It's a spiritual journey. And I want to tell you about mine. I was born in an Irish Catholic family, Irish Catholic as opposed to Roman Catholic. And we were Glasgow Irish. We were a bunch of Irish that, moved to Scotland and then came to Canada originally. I was born in Canada. We were an extraordinary bunch of people. I come from a family of singers. They were two sisters who came married, each had 8 or 9 children, and they lived next door to each other and then married every other Irish Catholic in Victoria, British Columbia. So I'm related to half of that city. And they used to have these mammoth parties, and, keep going to, I keep going to these meetings, things, because I keep learning stuff. I keep learning stuff about me. I've done a lot of 5th-step work and 10th-step work, and I've flushed out my system. I've gotten rid and made peace with a whole lot of stuff, but there's stuff that sticks to the side, that sometimes doesn't dislodge for years and years and years. I'm 34 years sober. I was at a conference with Bob recently, and there were a whole bunch of Irish and Scottish guys there and gals, and after the meetings for this conference, they had what they called a hoolie, which is, I didn't know it had a name, and what it is they just put the chairs in a circle, and out came guitars and squeeze boxes and all kinds of stuff, and they all started singing all the old songs from the old country. Well, I jumped in and sang a couple of things, and what it did is it dislodged a memory from my childhood that I had skipped over, that I didn't even know that I remembered or dealt with. In order to sustain a successful relationship or resentment, a successful resentment, what you have to do is you have to freeze frame the person. It's like clicking pause at a moment in their life when they are the worst. And you have to keep it there your entire life to keep the resentment going. You can never let the movie go, because then you'd have to deal with the fact that maybe they grew and changed, or maybe the things that came up to this moment were catastrophic for them and they were not at their best, And when you do that, when you look at people like that, then what happens is resentments dissolve because you can't sustain them. And I was raised by these sullen giants of men. I was born in the middle of World War II, and the men came back from that war, and they were a generation that did not speak. They were a generation who, they were all suffering from post-traumatic stress, but nobody had a name for that, and nobody knew anything about that. They were simply men that took whatever horror they had lived through or seen and stuffed it somewhere and never talked about it. And they were men that went away heavy drinkers and came back from that experience hard drinkers. Hard drinkers. And they were hard, silent guys. And I was sensitive and artistic and strange and weak and frail. I had a lot of stuff going on that didn't mix well with hard, silent men. And I carried something around with me all my life about those kind of guys. I've never liked those kind of guys. I've always been intimidated by those kind of guys. I've never been able to talk to them or feel comfortable around them. But they gave me a gift that saved my life, and I got to thank them a couple of weeks ago. Because what would happen in my great Aunt Mary's house was they would have these parties. Now, this is way before television. It was it was just after the war. They had come back. They had stuffed all this stuff. They were getting on with their lives. They had come back to women who didn't recognize them anymore, did not know them emotionally, children that they were strangers to. It was a tough, tough time for those men, and they hunkered down and did what they had to do, and those of us who were children or wives of them didn't know what to do. So my great Aunt Mary would have these parties. She had a great big huge old house with a great big huge living room, and it had a piano. And so what these parties involved was a huge amount of drinking, but there was also a lot of somebody playing the piano and people singing. And all us kids would go there because nobody could afford a babysitter, and they'd put us in the upstairs bedrooms until the party was over, and then they'd wrap us up and take us home. But there was a point in the party that I knew about. I was 6 or 7 years old. And it was at the end of the night when the party was over. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, usually 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And what would happen is the women were cleaning up the party. And so they had cleared off the tables and everything else. And they were in the kitchen washing the dishes and talking and putting things away. And the men were waiting for them, and they would be sitting in a circle. And my great Uncle Alec would go to a locked cabinet and take out a very special bottle of an Irish malt whiskey. And he had these little glasses, and he would hand them all a little glass and pour them a wee dram for the road. And these great, huge men in my life, who were about my size, but when you're that tall, they're giants, would sit, and they wouldn't look at each other. They'd be looking at the floor, and they'd be sipping on this little dram, and one of them would start to sing one of the old songs. One of the songs of being driven off the land and not allowed to speak their language, and of longing to go back to Ireland, and all those extraordinary songs. And I come from a family of singers, and one would start with the melody line, and then a bass would come in underneath them, and a tenor would come up above, and soon there would be 3 or 4 part harmony of these men, strong, silent men, filling this room with this extraordinary sound of their voices. It was like a Welsh choir. And what would happen is the women in the kitchen eventually, after the first song was kind of through, would put down what they were doing, and they would slowly walk into the dining room, and they would stand at the door to the living room, and they would listen for a while to these men who were now strangers to them, that they were trying to reconstruct lives with, and listen to the music. And they would slowly start to walk around behind the circle, and they would join in these rich, honey-laden alto voices and these beautiful sopranos. And soon we had 6- and 8-part harmony of these ancient songs. And it was a moment that I stayed awake for at every one of these parties. It was magical. And one night I was sitting on the landing. I was about 7 years old. I had white blonde hair and great big huge blue eyes. I was a little skinny, frightened kid. And the music drew me in. And I walked down the stairs and came into the room and stepped into the circle and opened my mouth. And what I found out was that I had this high, sweet boy soprano voice. I stepped in and I sang, "If you ever go across the seas to Ireland, remember at the closing of your day." And I stopped. And my mother stepped toward me, and my father put his hand out and stopped her. And one of my uncles from behind me said, "Let the boy finish. He has a tear in his voice." And they let me finish the song. And the basses came in underneath it, and the tenors came above it, and the altos came beside, and the sopranos were there. And we were singing 8 or 9-part harmony. Within 6 months, I was in a boys' choir. By the time I was 10 years old, I was earning money on singing at weddings and funerals and on the radio stations, and I had discovered a voice that would eventually take me to Broadway. And I went to New York and had a successful career as a singer. I still do that to this day. But what they gave me was a gift that I denied for a very, very long time. They opened my voice. They gave me this magical gift. And it wasn't until about a month ago that I fully realized the extent of that gift. It's odd about this fellowship. Chuck Chamberlain used to talk about peeling the onion, the layers of the onion, uncover, discover, and discard, that there isn't any center to us. We're just layers and layers and layers and layers, and the miraculous journey that we're on is that we get to discover these incredible things. So, of course, that resentment to those men dissolved because they allowed me into the circle, and they allowed me to open my throat and to sing the song that I had to sing. But something else happened at that moment. It was the end of the party, and the wee dram had been poured. So what connected to me and took a very, very long time to unconnect was I connected alcohol with beauty, alcohol with song. So by the time I was 14 years old, I got drunk for the first time. And what it did was, I was an extremely shy kid, despite the fact that I was doing all this kind of thing. I could not relate one-to-one on people. I mean, I could stand in front of a group of people and sing, but I couldn't talk to anybody. And when I was 14 years old, I was extremely uncomfortable. I found comfort. Southern comfort is what I found. And I just got blasted that night. I blacked out. I threw up. I came to under a bush. I could hardly wait to do it again. Because what happened is what we've heard in speaker after speaker after speaker was the effect. It was dazzling. I had lived all my life under the crushing burden of potential. My father was a drunk. My father was an alcoholic. He was one of the hard drinkers that what we say in Irish families, he had the failing, and he drank himself into becoming an alcoholic, and so the disaster of living with an alcoholic in an alcoholic family, my father was a drunk, my mother was a saint, the formula, and it was just an absolute disaster. But my father wanted me to be better than he was. They came from a generation, they wanted us to achieve more than that they had achieved. And I was good, I was smart. I got straight A's in school and all that kind of stuff, but I would come home with a report card that had 7 A's and 1 A minus. And my father would look at it and say, "What happened here?" what happened here? Now, I tell you, I got a learning problem, and a hearing problem. What my father was saying to me is, you have such a good brain. You are so smart. You know how to do this so well that it should be all A's. You've got everything you need. What I heard him say was that I wasn't enough. And I held that resentment of my father for years, that my sense of not being enough came from him. It didn't. I just didn't hear it right. He never told me that at all. He told me I could be or do anything I wanted to do or be. 14 years old, drunk, I was everything I needed to be. I was cute, I could dance, I could fight, I could laugh, I could kiss, fool around, everything. I mean, it was just dazzling to me. And so, you know, I was starting into puberty, and I mean, it was painful. I don't know, how many love puberty? How many skipped puberty? I did. That's one of the unfortunate things is we all start getting drunk, 14 years old, we skip puberty, we never learn how to solve our own problems or grow up or go through the pain that all the normal people go through. And so when we get sober, we have to do it in AA. That's why we're such jerks when we're new, We're all 14 years old, learning how to go to a dance sober. So anyway, I started getting drunk when I was 14 years old. When I was 17 years old, I raided my aunt's, Margaret's, she was a nurse, her medicine cabinet, and by the time I was 18 years old, I'd been getting drunk for 4 years. I'd been taking drugs for a year, and I was in trouble with the chemicals, but the idea of living without them was now terrifying to me. It was now impossible for me to do it without a little something to help me along, to help me to the edge. And I said the phrase that only an alcoholic says. I declared myself an alcoholic when I was 18 years old by saying this. Alcoholics are the only people in the world who say this. If you've ever heard anybody say it, you're listening to a drunk. If you've ever said it, you're a drunk. Here's the phrase: I can control my drinking. That's it. Social drinkers never say that. Social drinkers, if they make the kind of fools of themselves as we do, stop drinking. Which I think is really weird, don't you? So I started the Great Obsession. Now, I don't know about you, but I never got control and enjoy in the same room at the same time, ever. I mean, when I was controlling my drinking, and I occasionally tried that, I was miserable, absolutely miserable. The only way I've ever liked to drink is wildly out of control. I mean, I love getting bombed, blasted, ripped, smashed, all those wonderful phrases we have for ourselves. I love being obliterated. I am at 3 o'clock in the morning, stark naked, howling at the moon on Main Street, drunk, Woo! That's how I drink. I don't know about you. I have never sipped anything in my entire life. I still don't. I ate dinner in about 38 seconds. I mean, our meeting one time, had an actual serious discussion on social drinking. It was the funniest meeting I have ever been to in my life. A bunch of people who know nothing about social drinking were talking about social drinking. It was hilarious. We decided that social drinking was that you drink a little, but you don't end up tattooed, writing bad checks, or married to somebody you don't know. So we decided it didn't sound like any fun at all, so we want to do that. So anyway, I'm 20 years old. I go to New York. I got a talent the world couldn't live without. And I said, I'd seen way too many Hollywood movies. And as I saw Manhattan, I said, in 5 years, you're going to know my name. And in 5 years, a lot of people did know my name for a lot of the wrong reasons, but they knew my name. And I did a whole bunch of Broadway shows and a whole bunch of stuff. And by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was drinking a quart of scotch a day, and I'd picked up a little non-habit forming marijuana habit. And I was working the docks. I love the docks. Not where the ships come in. Doctors. I love doctors. They're so stupid and so arrogant. It's just the best, They are amazed that we lie to them. And I recognize something from doctors right off the bat is that they don't know how to say goodbye without writing something. So if you give them the right information, they'll write what you want. So I got a physician's desk reference and, went and talked to them about the fact that I wasn't sleeping or I was too fat or I was nervous or whatever the hell I wanted. I always had 3 on the string, and then we'd meet for lunch and we'd swap. Here, you want an orange one? I got a green one. You want to try green? Oh, I got a black one. You want a black one? So we'd swap our pills. So I lived in the wonderful world of chemistry, and I told you I was going to all those moral superiors. But then I decided what I needed was a good woman, and I found her in an elevator, and we were both going to rehearse a show, and she was a little dancer. She was the cutest thing I'd ever seen in my life, and we hooked up and started our dance of death that eventually led into AA and Al-Anon. And we went on a national tour, and it ended in Los Angeles, and I decided that it was a new beginning. I don't know about you, but I'm up to my ass in new beginnings. God save me from another new beginning. I'm just too tired for. So anyway, that was so. Then we got married, and she settled down, and. And she was a drinker. She used to drink, but oh boy, could she drink. And then one night, she had a sip of something. She put it on her coffee table, and she said, "This is boring," and she never drank again. She never went through withdrawals, nothing, never had any problem with it. She's not an alcoholic, And then she noticed that I drank, and then all hell broke loose. And on April 23rd, 1974, my life crashed down around me. I was arrested by the West Hollywood police, taken down and photographed and fingerprinted and with the front of my pants from the waistband to the knees and soaked in my own urine, and sent home on my own recognizance. And luckily she wasn't home. She was off saving somebody who didn't need to be saved. And so we couldn't do that thing of that it was all their fault somehow. I was there, stuck with me. And I said, I wonder if I'm an alcoholic. Anyone who knew me for 20 minutes knew that I was an alcoholic. I had been on a week-and-a-half vodka run. Before that, I had become a wine connoisseur. That's a wino with a credit card. And but somehow a week and a half before that, I said, "Ah, to hell with this," and I just went to straight cheap vodka, because get it done, So the next day I came to, and I was working in real estate at that point, and it was my turn to drive as we went around and looked at the new houses for sale. And in my car got a woman with 6 years of sobriety, Mary, who was this Irish woman who was about 70 years old, who had 3 drinks of scotch every night of her life, and a woman who was going through a divorce, and she was drinking a little too much. And so they started talking about drinking. They talked about situational drinking and alcoholic drinking and social drinking. And I thought, if these bras don't shut up, I'm going to start screaming and I won't be able to stop. And so we got back to the office at about 11:15, and I said the last phrase. I took Suzanne aside, and I said, "Suzanne, I'm an alcoholic, and I got 20 minutes before I go to pieces." And I thank God because she heard the screaming, and she canceled everything, and she 12-stepped me. Now, Suzanne had 6 years of sobriety, and I'd been watching her for a year. And I got to tell you, there's somebody watching me, and there's somebody watching you, and I don't know who it is, but there's somebody watching you to see how you're getting through whatever you're getting through. And they got a real bad drinking problem, and they're watching to make sure, waiting for you to screw up, waiting for you to blow up and get drunk. And what happened, that didn't happen with Suzanne. She told everybody she was in AA. And she was having a great time. She had a fabulous sense of humor. She was incredibly successful in business. She was attractive. She was bright. She was great. And she was the one that I'd been watching. I thought, maybe this AA thing ain't so bad, So she trusted me. She canceled all her appointments. She took me to her place, and we sat down at a dining room table. And she said, "When was the last time you drank?" And I told her, and she said, "Okay, this is going to help." And she poured me a huge glass, and I can taste it to this day, of orange juice and Caro syrup. And she said, this will help with the dehydration, and you're going to start losing some sugar. And so she, and then she had the big book on her dining room table, and she read chapter 3, chapter 5, and I thought, that woman is going to read that entire book to me. And then she told me her story. Now, my story was sleazy, but hers was disgusting. It was. And then she told me that she was taking me to an AA meeting, and that, you know, I wouldn't have to put any money in the first time, and that, and she was going on, and she said, "Do you believe in God?" And I said, "Well, I suppose so." And she said, "That's good enough." And she said, she was great. And I said, "Well, you know, drinking is the problem, but, you know, I have some psychological problems. You know, I have some issues, you know, some things." We didn't call them issues then. I forget what we called them. It was bullshit, whatever we called them then, too. And I...
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
And she looked at me and she said, "You know, honey, we define sobriety in Southern California as clean and sober." And I said, "What exactly does that mean?" She said, "That means we don't drink any alcohol and we don't take any self-administered mind-altering chemicals that affect us from the neck up." I was real disappointed at that news, I got to tell you that. So she said, "We're going to your place to get rid of everything that's there." And I said, "Okay." You know. So we drove to my place, and she poured out all my booze. She poured it in the kitchen sink, you know, as I wept, you know. And then she went to my medicine cabinet with a cardboard box and scooped everything out and put it, you know. And she said, "Okay, where's the weed?" And I gave her the weed. So she took everything, she put it in her trunk, locked it, and she said, "Come on." So she bought me a sandwich and took me to my first meeting. Now, my first meeting was in Southern California. It was in Hollywood on a Wednesday night at Los Feliz, and there were about 400 people there, and it was terrifying. It was in a church basement. It was exactly as I feared it was going to be. It had gray walls, a low ceiling, and it was filled with smoke. We smoked then. I mean, it was like smog. You couldn't see across the room. And it was the 24th of April. It was a rather warm night. Now, you know, I want to tell you, I looked fabulous at my first AA meeting. I was 6'1", weighed about 150 pounds. I had on a $250 sports jacket from Saks Fifth Avenue. I had on French gabardine slacks, Italian loafers, and designer tie. I had several national commercials running on television as the nice young man next door. I looked fabulous. I really did. I looked better then than I do now. I walked in and everybody knew that I was drunk, and I couldn't figure that out. There were a couple of things that were going on that I wasn't aware of. One of them was I had been drinking straight vodka for a week and a half, and it was a rather warm night, and to cover it, I had put on a lot of lemon lime cologne. So I smelled like a gimlet. Or margarita. And I had newcomer eyes. Now, the only other place you see eyes like that, other than on a newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous, are on a dog loose on a freeway. I was just... And it must have been a real slow night because all 400 people turned. It was like being dropped into a shark tank. I've never seen so many teeth coming at me in my life. Hi! And they shook your hand, they wouldn't let go, and they touched you, and they got right into your face and whispered really weird stuff like, "Keep coming back. Easy does it. You just take it one day at a time. Think. It was like being stoned to death with fridge magnets. God. So I sat down at my first meeting. She made me sit in the front row. I always sit in the front row because I can't take anybody's inventory because I can't see who's there. So I sit in the front row, and sitting next to me was a guy named Jimmy. Now, Jimmy was a little African-American guy who had troubles other than alcoholism, and Jimmy liked to talk to the speakers. So when somebody was up here talking, if Jimmy agreed with what they said, he would say, "Yeah." He's sitting next to me, 400 people. And on the other side is this guy who's talking to me, and he's talking to me, and he's telling me his story. I've never met, I don't know who he is. What is it? And he's telling me my story. So I'm listening. His story is exactly the same as mine. It was a miracle. A miracle. 400 people. I'm sitting next to a guy who's exactly the same as me. done exactly the same stuff, got 3 years of sobriety, knows everything. A miracle. I asked him to be my sponsor. And then later on, what I found out, Suzanne, I thought, had kidney problems because she kept jumping up from the dining room table while she was 12-stepping me and running off. And I thought she had to go to the bathroom. What I found out later was that she was jumping up and going to her bedroom and calling this guy. The reason his story was the same as mine is he knew my story. And then he starts shoving the 12 steps down my throat. You know what they do. And because the problem was that I was so incredibly detached from my feelings and emotions. Thank God for those old guys. Thank God for those guys who had been around. They understood that no matter how cute and adorable I looked, I had a terminal case of alcoholism, that I was in grave danger, that I was in real terrible trouble, that if I drank again, I could very easily die. They knew that. They knew that, you know, they knew that there was Skid Row. They also knew that there was Skid Crescent and Skid Terrace and Skid Avenue and Skid, you know, Boulevard. They knew about the degrees of that it didn't matter what it looked like on the outside, that I was in terrible trouble. And so they treated me like I was in terrible trouble. Thank God. Thank God. And they shoved those, you know, admitted they were powerless over alcohol. My life could become unmanageable. Well, there I was in my $250 sports jacket with, you know, fingerprint ink. You know, nice accessory. I thought, you know, you can't get that stuff off, you know. You know, my life was dribbling down my sleeve. Of course it was unmanageable. I couldn't make a decision. And I'm one of those ones in '74. There weren't any treatment centers. I mean, there were these things called recovery houses that just sounded like something out of Charles Dickens that I wouldn't go near. And so I'm one of the ones they gave us half a cup of coffee to, and we shook it out in the meetings. We detoxed in AA meetings, you know, with 400 or 500 people around you. And the old guys had pockets full of hard candy, and as soon as you got a little shaky, they'd shove candy down your throat, and they'd give you half a cup of coffee. So they're getting the sugar into you and getting the caffeine into you, because what we later found out was that by the time we arrive here, we can no longer produce dopamine or, you know, serotonin, and we're just wired and nuts and all that kind of stuff. And people used to have grand mal seizures in AA. I mean, that was always an event. You know, somebody like me would be up here talking, and somebody over there would suddenly go, and nobody get excited. Somebody get up and, you know, make sure his tongue was okay and call an ambulance. And the ambulance guys would come in, take him out, and then off he'd go, you know. But one thing that would happen that was wonderful is your sponsor would be sitting next to you, and he would go, "See that? You keep drinking, that'll happen to you." So I just didn't want to be like a salmon flipping around in an AA meeting. So I want to thank all those guys who had those seizures. They saved my life. They really did. I got into service the first night that I was sober. He told me to fold up my chair, empty my ashtray, and wash my cup. And I've been doing that kind of stuff ever since. Came to believe that a power greater than me could restore me to sanity. They explained to me that the big book was a power greater than me, that this room was a power greater than me, somebody with 20 minutes more sobriety than me was a power greater than me. There were all kinds of powers greater than me. I didn't have to make the big leap yet. But restore me to sanity, I had a kind of lightweight, you know, insane story. You know, I'm a nice upper middle class drunk. We don't go to funny farms with rubber rooms and paper slippers and no doorknobs on this side. We go to therapists and talk about stress. And if we work it right, they'll give us meds. And so insanity was a little extreme, I thought, for me. But they assigned me a new best friend. His name was Rich, and Rich had 6 months more sobriety than me. And Rich could not talk and could not drive, and I had a car and couldn't shut up, so he was my new best friend. And so we would drive to meetings, and I'd go, blah, 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 and he'd sit there. So it was perfect. And occasionally I would say something to him, and he would say, "Don't take my inventory." It was a perfect relationship. And so it was the 70s, and we were going to a very spiffy meeting in Beverly Hills on a Friday night, the Rodeo meeting, and you had to look good to go to that one. And we had big hair in the 70s, and Rich, unfortunately, his was thinning. So it took him a long time to get the do ready to go to the, you know, he had to kind of torture it all forward and then spray it and then kind of bend it over and back, and, you know, to get that helmet look, you know, that hair helmet look. And while he was doing that one night, he had a big old medical dictionary, and I happened to thumb through it, and I looked up the definition of insanity. And out of this huge, long definition popped a phrase. And I'll lay it on you if you're having trouble with the second step. Medical definition of insanity. Quote, a seeming inability to learn from one's mistakes. Let me just lay that on you again. A seeming inability to learn from one's mistakes. I took the second step right there, right then. Bam! My whole life was slamming up against the same brick wall over and over and over again, and my only concern was to get out of the situation. I never, ever bothered to look at how I got into the situation. I led a completely unexamined life as an alcoholic. As an alcoholic, as the bottom of my existence, of my dreams, of my morals, of my ideals were dripping out of me, I was building this incredibly ugly, hard shell over me, this ego which protected me, which made any attack or any comment on my behavior your mistake. I know what I'm doing. Leave me alone. And I built a rock-solid ego that nobody could break through, while the rest of me dissolved out from under it. I was an empty shell by the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. Insane. I couldn't make a sane decision if you held a gun to my head. I would come home from a meeting and my wife would say, what did the speaker say? And I'd go, some guy had been talking for an hour and I couldn't remember anything that he said. I mean, it was a miracle that I'd come home with a sentence. The guy said that, you know. Also, what was happening was the big book was, I was the first one to die of lack of sleep. And the only thing that would put me to sleep was reading the big book. I'd read it and I'd go, you know. So I was a little nuts. So then I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to God as I understand God. Oh my God. I told you I was an Irish Catholic. I'd gone 12 years to Catholic schools. I've been taught how to be a man by men who had given it up. Now this is my learning disability. They gave me a God, and I'm sure that this isn't what they taught me, but this is what I got. There was this big old dude with a big book who was writing down not only everything that I did, but everything I thought of doing. And I was more a thinker than a doer, but anyway, it was enough that what was going to happen was upon my death, which could happen at any moment, I would be flung into eternal flames for all of eternity, where devils would flay the flesh off of me with whips. But he loved me. I had a real problem with that concept. You know, Now, I am sure at this day that's not what they taught me, but that's what I heard. So by the time I arrived in Alcoholics Anonymous, my entire spiritual life consisted of those two alcoholic prayers. The first one is, dear God, get me out of this and I will never do it again. And the second alcoholic prayer is, whew. My entire spiritual life was based on getting God to make an exception in my case. You know what? Some things have not changed. I was in Europe last month. This sobriety sucks, you know. I was in Europe last month, and my passport was stolen, so I had to fly here, you know, from Canada. So, no problem. So I went to the airport. I had identification. I didn't have a passport because it was stolen, and, you know, I'm going to apply for it. Well, they wouldn't let me on the plane. Me. But it's me. There's been a law in existence for 2 years that you can't get on an airplane without a passport, but it's me. I've got to go do something important. So I had to take a charter out of Bellingham, drive across the the border to the United States and take a charter with coming to Las Vegas on Thursday night with the whole people who were bombed out of their skulls. So I got a lesson in how enchanting we are when we're drunk on a plane. You know, with the attendant saying, "Please sit down and fasten your seatbelts so we can pull away from the gate," you know. Oh. So I'm still, don't hear things. So anyway, I had to start on this thing, and the thing about the third step is not that I had to understand God, but that I had to make a decision. Make a decision. Let me tell you what that decision is like in Alcoholics Anonymous. If I want a house, I don't get the keys. If I want a house, I got to go on the internet or buy a newspaper and find, look at the real estate ads and find a realtor and go look at a bunch of houses and then eventually find one that I like and make an offer and a counter offer and another offer, and we eventually decide on a price, and then we have a title search, and I go to the bank and get a loan, and we inspect the house and and all this stuff, and after a long time, and all this is complete, I get the key to the house. The decision to have a house and the getting the key to the house, there's a whole bunch of steps. So the third step was that I recognized that in order for me to stay sober, I was going to have to live my life based on spiritual principles. And I made a decision to do that. Suzanne, when she 12-stepped me, had hooked me into this thing. She said, if you do this thing, you stay sober and you work these steps, it'll be possible for you to make a 180-degree turn as a human being. And I hated every square inch of myself. So the idea of being a different person was dazzling to me. So that's when I started these things. I started working on the spiritual principles. The first one is that I had to define the problem. I'm the problem. The guy who was sponsoring me, I was 3 weeks sober, turned on me and told me I had 3 weeks to do my fourth step. I didn't know you couldn't do it at 3 weeks, so I did it. At 6 weeks, I told God, myself, and another human being exactly who I was, which is not the way that I do things. I mean, if you got together 300, there was no news in it. If you got together 300 people who knew me, you could get the whole story. I only gave little bits to people. I never gave the whole thing. So I gave the whole thing to this guy who was my sponsor. If you're new, get a sponsor, because this program makes no sense at all. I didn't know what you were talking about. I thought you were bizarre people, and also my chips were pretty scattered anyway. An interesting thing, did you read Time magazine recently, that whole thing on alcoholism they did? They've done incredible research into the brain of alcoholics. Why they want to waste their time, I don't know. But anyway, and they found out this profound thing. They thought that alcoholism only affected a very small area of the brain, the dopamine and the serotonin part. But what they found out is that alcoholism, chronic alcoholism, like I got, when you're a daily drinker and blackouts and all that kind of stuff, does massive damage to the brain. And what happens is when they detoxify you, when you stop drinking and using drugs, what they have found, listen to this one, is it takes approximately 90 days for the brain to reset itself so that it can start learning. Isn't that incredible? It takes 90 days to reset itself so that it can start learning. Wow. Those old dudes that said go to 90 meetings in 90 days knew something, didn't it? It's incredible. Anyway, so there I was, telling this thing to everybody, to this guy. Now it's great. Get a spot. Do it with a sponsor. there's all those guys who say, well, I went and talked to a priest, or I went and talked to a psychiatrist, I went and did it. They go off somewhere and do their fifth step, and they come back and still nobody knows them. I have a desperate need to be known. I've been an outlaw. I've been a stranger. I've been an unwelcome guest all my life. I need somebody to know me. Somebody to know me. Because I can't ask anybody anything. I gotta have somebody. So here was this guy. And suddenly what happened is those half-hour telephone calls were taking 10 minutes. Because I didn't have to do the backstory anymore. He had the whole story. So it compressed a lot of time. We got a lot of stuff done, and we started doing some things. We did the 6th and 7th step, which was a list, and I've got a guy here with me that I sponsor who taught me a thing about this, and what I do now with the guys that I sponsor. When we get that list of shortcomings and defects of character, we do a long list, and then I send them away and say, okay, now I want the opposite of all these defects of character and shortcomings. I want you to find out what the opposites of those are. And then we get that list, and I say, okay, here's what we're shooting for. This is what we're shooting for. We got a plan now. And And we do that. I wrote a list of all the people that my sponsor said, I want you to write a list of all the people that you've harmed, not the people that you've annoyed, the people you have harmed. You know, we can keep this as a manageable list. So we did that, and he took some off and added some others. And I said, how do you make amends to your parents and your wife and your relatives, you know, that you've just abused and drove crazy? How do you make amends to them? And he said, you stay sober a long time, because they're going to be waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know, they have lived through your insanity for years. Yeah, it was 15 years before my mother came and heard me talk. So then, you know, I've done that, and then the amends step. Now, that's not an apology step. I don't get to go to you and apologize for my behavior because I'm a world-class apologer. If there was an Olympic event for apology, I'd be a gold medal winner. I can come to you and apologize for stealing $1,000 from you and walk away with another grand. You know? What I got to do to make amends is I got to come up to you and say, listen, I stole $1,000 from you. Now I need to make sure that you get that back. I have a checkbook with me, or if you want it in cash, we can go and get the cash. But I also want to make sure that you understand that I will not do this again to you or to anybody else. And you can watch me if you want for as long as you want. That's the pledge I make to you. So amends is a whole lot more than merely apologizing. It's a pledge to somebody that you won't do that again to them or to anybody else. Now, I continue to take personal inventory on a daily basis. Like I said, I'm an ex-Catholic. It never leaves you. And so when I go through my day and I do what did I do right and what did I do wrong, I beat the hell out of myself. I don't know about you. I punish myself worse than anybody else would do. So I finally had to do that so that I now do what did I do today that I approve of and what did I do today that I don't approve of. And the stuff that I don't approve of, I set out to change. The stuff that I do approve of, I let go. Chuck used to talk about we live our lives in 24-hour compartments. We let go of the victories and the defeats at the end of the day, and I love that. And I seek through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact. God remains a mystery. I don't understand God, but I do have a profound and personal relationship with the power greater than myself that is so personal that it's none of your business, and as yours is to me. And I've done a whole lot of meditations. At one point, Rich and I were deeply involved in the 11th step, and I have been at times in my sobriety in danger of being crushed by a falling bookshelf of spiritual literature. I've done it. And I have simplified it. I've found a phrase out of the other big book: "Be still and know that I am God." And what I do is I sit in a chair and I don't lie down because that's called napping, and I sit in a comfortable chair and I contemplate that phrase, and that kind of keeps me centered. And I pray for only the power to carry that out. I have had a spiritual awakening as a result of that step. I was hoping for a spiritual event like a burning bush or the wind blowing up my butt like Bill Wilson, but that hasn't happened. My spiritual awakening has been of the educational variety that they talk about in the Spiritual Experience Part 2, and it has been a slow awakening, and it has not been it's not been a steady curve. It dips, it dips. And I have tried to carry the message to alcoholics over the years. I do whatever is asked of me. I am on phone lists, and I remember very early, I was in my first year of sobriety. I think I was about 6 months sober, and we got a 12-step call, Rich and I, and we drove by my sponsor's place, and we were all going, we got a 12-step call. And he explained to me that there was a difference between carrying the message and spreading the disease. And so what I did on that night, Rich laid the program on the poor guy as I washed the dishes and cleaned up his apartment. And, that's what I do to this day. I'm now, we were just talking about it. I'm now absolutely useless on a 12-step call other than to be the designated driver, because the new guy I take somebody with 6 months of sobriety with me, and the new guy looks at me and says, "How long have you been sober?" And I say 34 years, and his eyes roll back in his head, And then he'll turn to the guy with 6 months sobriety and say, "How sober are you in 6 months? How'd you do it? How'd you tell them?" Yeah. And then we get to practice these principles in all our affairs, and that's the big stickler. Because you know what? We can get awfully healthy in these rooms. We can get awfully healthy We become, and we can become very big deals in Alcoholics Anonymous. The you know, the requirements for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous are awfully low, and you know, and it is fairly easy to look like a big deal in this fellowship, but sooner or later we got to take this stuff that we talk about and that we discuss and that we do outside. We take it into our communities. We take it into our homes. We take it into our workplaces. We become fathers. We become husbands. We become, you know, we become sons. And what we have to do is take all this stuff out there. That's the real mark, you know. What I love is doing stealth 12-step work. That's one of my favorite things to do. I've had a business career as well as a creative career for years and years and years. And several years ago, I was the president of the Chamber of Commerce in the community that I lived in, and I love those kind of things. I was at a dinner party one time with a guy sitting next to me who had just belted down his 6th glass of wine while I'm eating my, you know, rubber chicken, and he said, "Man, I wish I could cut back on this stuff." And I said, "Oh yeah, I know how you feel." And he says, "What do you mean? You don't drink?" See, in my community, I'm not known as a guy who can't drink. I'm known as a guy who doesn't drink, you know. He said, "You're drinking cranberry juice." I said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "Well, did you used to drink?" "Oh, yeah, yeah." "Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah? Did you drink a lot?" Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." "Tell me, did you get into any kind of trouble?" Oh, yeah, yeah. He said, "But you don't drink." No, I don't drink." "Well, when did you drink?" "Well, about 30-odd years ago." Whoa, whoa. And then I say, "Look, I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober in AA for over 30 years. You want to go to a meeting?" You know, the guy goes, "You're an alcoholic?" That's when we got him. When it would never occur to them that we were drunks, you know, then they're hooked. Because I remember going to my first meeting and saying to Suzanne, "Where are the alcoholics?" I mean, because they all look like you. I mean, they all look, you know, clean and successful, and that's when we get them. That's when we got them. So I keep doing that, and I try to practice the principles of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, and my life has been quite extraordinary. I've been rich and I've been poor in Alcoholics Anonymous. I prefer the problems of being rich to the problems of being poor, but they all got problems. Being rich and having stuff don't fix you or protect you. Sometimes they clutter up your life. And I've, you know, over the years I've gotten to do these things. When I was 8 years sober, well, let me tell you about when I was 5 years sober, because that's important. When I was 5 years sober, I hit what there isn't much literature about it, but it's a thing that a lot of us hit between 5 and 7 years, and it's that second crash. It's that second surrender. It is a horrendous, gut-grinding, awful time in sobriety for a whole lot of us. And what happened to me is 5.5 years sober, I completely destroyed my own life. I literally, you know, emotionally, psychologically poured gasoline all over myself and lit myself on fire. I mean, I destroyed my own life. I did not drink. I seriously considered suicide. And when I was forced to my knees again to be, you know, spread eagle face down on my living room carpet saying, "God, I have no idea what to do anymore. I am out of answers. I have done everything I think you're telling me to do, and I want to die. You're going to have to help me like you helped me then." And so what I had to do is I had to go back and I had to do the 12 steps on a level that I had never done before, in a very, very deep level, in very close contact with the sponsor. And what I had found, what it is, and this is the phenomenon, what happens over the years of being sober up to that point is if we do all this work, what happens is the defects of character and the shortcomings, a whole lot of them just evaporate because we're not acting like horses' asses anymore. There's some that we have to work at, you know, and then there's some that God digs out of us with a stone knife and no anesthetic, you know. And what happens is by the time we're 5 years sober, there's a good deal of self-awareness about who we are and what we are and the kind of person we are and what needs to be worked on. But what's left is a superstructure that was protecting those things all the years. It's your coping mechanism. It was my coping skills. It was that shell that I had grown. Now, I had cleaned out all the inside of the shell, but it was still there, that ego, and it needed to go. It had to go, or I was going to die inside it. And taking a mallet to that and breaking it up and getting rid of it is extremely painful. And it's something, I believe it's what they call the second surrender. A lot of people don't get through it. And a lot of people, luckily like me, get very, very close and start doing the stuff that they did when they first got here, and we get through it. And so that was a significant time in my life. By the time I was 8 years sober, my life was back. It was mine. It was who I was. I was able to define myself and say, this is who I am. My daughter was born. Now you have beautiful and intelligent children, but I have Kate. She's now 26 years old and she's dazzling. I have pictures to prove it. And my life was extraordinary. My life was extraordinary. But, you know, we all seem to have an Achilles heel in sobriety. There's something that is always troublesome to us, you know. In my case, it was jobs. I kept getting jobs and losing jobs, and getting into business schemes that worked great for a while and then turned bad at the end. And, you know, so there was always kind of a bumpy road with me. About 5 years ago, I had a heart attack, and you know, when I look back on it, it's funny, you know. Unfortunately, I lived. It would have been fabulous if I had kicked off, and she could have been kind of, you know, a widow of that. Do you remember Sean? Oh, he said something that was just, it saved my life. I knew him, you know. Before he passed. I mean, it could have been perfect, but unfortunately I hung around. And what happens when a profound event like that happens, it changes you, it disrupts stuff, it changes your personality. I wasn't aware of it. But I hit another job crisis about 2 or 3 years ago, and she looked at me and she said, I can't do this anymore. And I said, you don't need to. You don't need to. So we decided not to wait until the children were dead. We separated and we did it all with sponsorship and, you know, and with as much dignity and as much compassion as we could. Nobody gets out of a 35-year marriage and a 37-year relationship without some pretty deep wounds and some pretty bad scars. But we tried not to inflict them on each other. We negotiated. We didn't go to divorce court. We negotiated a settlement of stuff and divided up 35 years of a relationship. And she's very successful in her life, and my life has just turned into something that is quite extraordinary. And I mean, you know, ultimately it's okay. But there are times when I see something like a sunset and turn, and forget that I'm alone watching the sunset. And do we wish the very, very best for each other? Of course, absolutely. Do we have lunch a lot? No. And so I went to my sponsor. I have an extraordinary sponsor. His name is Milton. Some of you know Milton. Milton is the man I love very much. He has been a great you know, for years I looked at a way to thank Milton for who he was and what he has done in my life, and I found it. I got to tell you this story, and this is a story about if you've got this kind of an idea, do it now, because you do it. If you found a way to say thank you to somebody who has helped you through your life, do it. Say thank you. He was going to Cleveland. Milton had been in a group called Billy Ward and the Dominoes in the late 40s, early 50s, and he was going to Cleveland for something, and he said, you know, I'm going to go to the Rock and Roll Museum. I had been there early and seen they had got a little bit of an exhibit on them. He said, I just want to see it, and I'm going to pick up some T-shirts for my grandkid. I said, oh, that's nice. So I emailed the Rock and Roll Museum and said, this guy's coming there on Saturday, you may want to meet him. Within 3 hours, they emailed back and said, yes, we want to meet this man. So I decided it was going to be a wonderful surprise. Don't surprises, they're basically hostile. Don't do them. So it was getting down to the point where he was about to leave. Now, Milton had walked away from that a long, long time ago and didn't talk about it, didn't really talk about it in AA. And it was a life that, it was a place that he hadn't fully resolved. And so I told him that I'd done it, and he got very mad at me, and he said, you shouldn't have done that. And I said, well, I did it, live with it. And So a friend of ours picked him up and took him up to the museum, and the director of the museum came down the stairs and said, "Milton, welcome to your home." Took him on a whole tour of the thing, took him up into the office and said, "Milton, I want to ask you something." He said, "While Billy Ward and the Dominoes was in Cleveland in 1949, I think it was, you had a hit song called 60 Minute Man." And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "You met with Alan Freed, the rock and roll disc jockey, in your hotel." And he said, "This song is different. It's not race music and it's not rhythm and blues, but it's something. It's a new form, and we've got to figure out something to call it." And Billy Ward said, "Well, you know, they were kicking around some ideas." And Billy Ward said, "Well, there's a phrase in the middle of the song: 'I'll rock you, I'll roll you, I'll love you all night.' Wait for it." And so my sponsor was in the room when they named rock and roll. And I mean, it's like a bunch of guys hanging around saying, "Well, why don't we call it Christianity?" You know, so you know, so they took him down. They bought him a big leather jacket, a big bomber jacket at that Rock and Roll Museum, and he came back and he started talking about it for the first time. But before he left the museum, and I love this, before he left the museum, the guy said, the head of the Rock and Roll Museum, he said, "I've met a lot of you guys from that era, and you're the first one that I've met who isn't bitter, because those guys got screwed." You know, the record companies made a fortune, and those performers never got anything. They didn't get a dime out of those records. And he said, "You're the first one that isn't bitter." And Milton said, "I've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous over 30 years. I can't afford to be bitter." He came home and he started talking about it for the first time, and it was wonderful. He was interviewed by a local paper and all that kind of stuff, and then he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I'm sorry, I always try to slip by that without feeling it. So he started to descend into a place. You know, the clouds started coming in on him, and we've been going through it. It's been a slow process, but it's been extremely painful for it. At this point, it's nice though. You know, out of every disaster becomes a gift. You know, and Milton can't remember what he had for breakfast, but he was at my first meeting 34 years ago, so he remembers me as a newcomer. So he sponsors me like I'm brand new now. It's just. Now you get to a meeting and you talk to a newcomer, and don't you forget to wash the dishes. Now, what step are you working on? It's just great. So anyway, after this thing, you know, I'm now, you know, 30 odd years sober and divorced, you know, and so I went to Milton and I said, "You know what? I've decided I'm going to become one of those bleeding deacons. I think that's what I want to do." There were a bunch of these old farts that used to sit in the back rows when I was new, and if you said, "I was reading this book," and somebody would yell, "Outside issue!" Remember the outside issue, guys? Yeah. And the old ones who used to say, "Well, I spilled more of my tie than you drank." You know, those jerks. So I've decided I want to become one of those guys. I'm just getting out of this thing. I'm just going to be there. I can be cranky. I just want to be I've always wanted to say to somebody, "Madam, that's the ugliest baby I've ever seen." I mean, I've always wanted to do that, you know? You know, I just one of those mean old guys in AA, you know? So I went and discussed it with Milton, and he said, "No, you're going to date." I said, "I'm going to what?" He said, "You're going to date." I said, "Milton, the last date I was on was 1969. There was Chappaquiddick, the moonwalk, and my last date. That's it. I haven't dated." I said, "All I know about dating is dead drunk. What I know about dating is we get drunk out of our minds, do unspeakable things until 3 o'clock in the morning, and you turn it into a pizza. That's what I know about dating. I mean, I know nothing about it, you know?" He said, "Well, you're going to find out. You need to get out there. You need to feel good about yourself." I said, "But I don't want to." So I thought, well, he's got Alzheimer's. He'll forget about this, you know? Well, they get fixed on things. So he's got this loop now about me dating. You know, "Have you been on a date?" "No, Milton, I'll talk to you 3 days later." "Have you been on a date?" Oh, God. He can remember that, but he can't remember breakfast. So So I'm doing this project, and there's this lovely lady who's, you know, kind of age appropriate, you know, in her mid-50s, and she's got a grown daughter, and I got a grown daughter, and she's doing some work on this project, and we had to discuss some business. So I said, well, why don't we grab a sandwich and we can talk about it. So we grabbed a sandwich, we talked about it. She paid for her sandwich, I paid for my sandwich. We talked about it, talked briefly about our kids. Went out to the parking lot. She got in her car, and I got in my car. I thought, ha ha! So I called Milton. I said, I've been on a date. 3 o'clock next morning, she called me dead drunk. Are you interested in me? I said, I'm really more interested in sleeping at the moment, but why don't we talk about this tomorrow? Well, of course, I'd forgotten about being a drunk. She didn't remember any of it. You know, like nothing, she was in a blackout. Nothing had happened as far as she was concerned, so it was great. So then I went to Milton. I said, look, I'm willing to take somebody to the movies, but look, if it gets up close and personal, I'm in trouble. I mean, if it, you know, I said, it's complicated dating right now. I mean, you got to have blood tests and doctor's reports and legal disclaimers and, you know, prenuptial dating agreements. I mean, it's complicated. And I said, you know, I got to tell you, you know, it's been a long time since there's been a party in my pants. I got to tell you, you know, you know, I said, you know, it's like Tasmania. It's down there, but who cares? You know, just, you know, I said, if anybody really gets close, I'm going to need a little help in that department, and I'm an alcoholic, you know. I have not had any alcohol or any mind-altering chemicals that affect me from the neck up. You know, the only way I could do is with those little blue pills, and I don't know about anything that affects you from the navel down, you know. I mean, you know, I'm an alcoholic. If one of those things works, woohoo! Yeah. Wonder what 5 will do. You know? I mean, they'd find me in a week and a half in a gutter under my own tent. Yeah. Dead. Have to be an open casket because they couldn't close the lid, you know. God. So we agreed that perhaps I should become one of the bleeding deacons and just become one of those miserable old farts in the back. And I'm happy with that because, you know what? I love living alone. I found out the difference between being alone and being lonely. You know? Being alone means I live alone. That's what it means. And to fight off those feelings of loneliness, I've expanded my community. That's all. I just go to more meetings. I know more people. I do more of this stuff. I had cut back when Kate was born, but now I'm up there doing more of it. I've entered back into the theater in my hometown. I work with a theater company for challenged actors who are challenged both physically and mentally. It's the most rewarding work I've ever done in the theater. I am still singing. I'm doing a Christmas pageant when I get home. I got to do a bunch of stuff. I'm busy, and I'm okay with my own company. I really, you know what? I tickle me. I make me laugh. You know, I'm having a great time. I like the same food as I eat. I like to watch the same programs as myself. I can go for weeks without getting my hair cut. Sometimes I don't shave. I eat junk food. I'm having a great time. I'm having a great time. And, you know, there's a lot to be said for happiness. We're all seeking that. But, oh, let me tell you about contentment. Let me tell you about contentment. It is lovely. It is lovely when I have those moments that those old guys talked about when I first got sober, who said their insides matched their outsides. I didn't know what they were talking about, but I sure wanted it. Well, let me tell you, sometimes my insides match my outsides. I am who I am. I'm like Popeye. I am who I am, you know? I'm okay. I got some stuff going on, you know? I just watched myself get broke. A couple of weeks ago, I called the guy who manages my portfolio. My portfolio. I'm a charity case for him, and his daughter said, he's just gone to the hospital with chest pains. So I didn't call back. I don't want to know. I mean, I just don't want to know. So I may not be as you know, but, you know, What the hell? I've been, I told you about I've had a thing with skin cancer since I was 40 years old. They blasted my ear and they took off my nose and put it back on, and I have to go when I get back to have a tumor taken off my lip. That's really attractive. But now I just want you to know that it's a fairly minor thing. It's not pretty, but it's very minor. I just don't want the AA rumor mill to start, he died of cancer in Las Vegas. Right there at a podium, he died of cancer. I saw it. A friend of mine saw it and told me about it. Yeah. So I'm working on letting my ego be the fuel instead of the engine of my life. And it's nice that I got the leisure to do that, that I'm not in crisis mode about my sobriety all the time, that I understand what that's about. The simplest thing is that I don't drink between meetings. And I'm like Debbie said, I don't drink fake drinks or any near nothing. I'm a guy who doesn't drink. And what I've done over the years is had the opportunity to come to places like this to report to you. Because you are the ones who said, I know how you feel. And this is what I've done. And so you've been the teachers of my life. So I stand before you to let you know how my progress is. And although I have a long, long way to go, because of you in rooms like this, I have come so far. And I am so grateful. And I love you very much. God bless you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.